Hello, and welcome to World War One. World War One started on August 1st, 1914, and ended November 11th, 1918. It is often, or was known at the time as well, as the Great War or the War to End All Wars. Of course, neither one of those things actually, unfortunately, proved to be accurate. It becomes labeled World War One later in history after it turns out it was not, in fact, the only world war. You can see here on the chart just about 26 million people died over the course of the war, roughly split equally, half of them from the military and half of them from non-military or civilians. We first have to talk about the causes of the war, both because they're complicated and therefore interesting, and also because it may have a sort of template or model that can help us learn and talk about future wars. One of the first causes is known as militarism, or the glorification of armed strength. Over the course of the years preceding the war, more and more countries in Europe were emphasizing their military, spending cash and money on their army as well as their navy to expand, to compete, and there was a broader cultural emphasis on the importance of the army as a sign of strength and power. So it's a combination of both political by the government as well as social factors by the people as well. Here are some charts and stats on the growing size of the armies across the countries of Europe, as well as the increase in cash spent on defense or on the military. Cause number two, alliances. This is a classic ironic cause because the purpose of alliances is to prevent war. They had started after the last bloody conflict in Europe, 1870s, to prevent future wars. The idea being, if you had a treaty or an alliance or a bond or connection, other countries would be reluctant to attack you. And this worked for 35 to 40 years. Unfortunately, of course, once war began, it drug in many other countries because of the alliances. Here is a chart, and it shows you the two main alliances, the Triple Alliance, Italy, Germany, and the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, also often called the Central Powers. They have other alliances here, as you can see. And then opposing them was the Triple Entente of Russia, France, and Britain. In the middle are years when these countries actually had their treaties. You don't need to know every detail and nuance of these treaties, but the fact that they had these alliances to support and to defend each other if they were ever attacked. You will notice not on this chart is the USA. We were increasingly isolated both by the ocean itself as well as through choice, through politics. We will come back to that later. Cause number three, nationalism, pride, passion, and support of one's country. On the upper left is a nationalistic portrait of the British Empire, the main male lion leading the pride, right? As well as on the right, a poster about German nationalism and German pride. In the middle is a rather creepy map of a bunch of sort of countries, each sort of expanding and growing in shape and size. This is more of a cultural or a social factor contributing to the growing confrontation across Europe leading up to World War I. We also have the underlying cause of imperialism. As these countries have expanded to conquer and rule over much of Africa as well as large parts of Asia, they are increasingly coming in conflict with each other. One way of thinking about World War I is that the wars and the practices and the weapons that they had been using in their empires come home to roost back in Europe. So taking the practices and the warfare and the machine guns and technology of imperialism and bringing it back home to the continent of Europe. The last cause starts in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo, shown here on the map. Specifically, the person of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He is the Archduke, or basically the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire up here to the north. And he decides to visit the newly included republic of his dad's empire on June 28th, 1914. You can guess what happens by the cartoon here in the lower portion. Specifically, assassination. Austria has taken control of Bosnia. The Serbs do not like this, and they view it as an encroachment on their territory, as another example of imperialism, but this time against the people of Europe. The Serbian military intelligence chief has trained and armed 3 men to sort of try and quash this invasion into what they view as their homeland and home territory. There's some idea that the prime minister of Serbia might have known about this and tried to stop it, though that still is somewhat hazy. Regardless, it is not stopped. The member of the Black Hand, a group from sponsored or backed and trained in part by Serbia, Gavrilo Princip, tries to shoot Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and he misses as Franz Ferdinand and his wife drive past in a open-top convertible car. Conveniently, it turns out as the car is driving away, it turns the corner, it goes around the block, and he sees them again. And this time he does not miss, and he shoots and he kills Archduke Franz Ferdinand, June 28th, 1914. And thus we begin World War I. Austria, who's sort of peeved that their crown prince has been shot and murdered, is given a blank check by Germany. What this means is Germany is encouraging, if not provoking, Austria to seek some sort of redress or retribution from Serbia. They thought that the rest of Europe would stay out of this. Of course, this proves to unfortunately be inaccurate, or at least it's unfortunate for the Austrians and the Germans. There's also some telegrams and evidence that people in the German government, as well as German generals, wanted a war to seize the opportunity to expand their control before the armies opposing them in the alliance, specifically France, have a chance to grow in size and power. So they seize this opportunity. Austria issues Serbia an ultimatum, a list of demands. These are very rigorous and unlikely to be met, which enforce they are not. The demands are rejected. Thus, as you can see here in the chart, Austria declares war on Serbia. Russia then declares war on Austria. Germany declares war on both Russia and Serbia, leading as well to the French and the British, a sort of domino chain reaction that puts these entangling alliances into effect, leading to what becomes known as the World War, the Great War, if you will. If you have trouble remembering the 5 main causes of World War I, just remember there was a general mania for war. Militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and of course the immediate proximate cause, the straw that broke the metaphorical camel's back, assassination. So general information about the war. Both sides thought it was going to be a speedy fight. False! In the words of the great philosopher and boxer Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. They have plans to execute a rapid, speedy war, and they anticipate being home by Christmas. This is not true. What this means is because they were planning on a short war, no economy had prepared for a lengthy war, nor the military, nor civilians, nor the government. No one could predict the sort of 4-year bloodshed, as you saw, millions and millions of people killed as a result. One of the reasons, the main reason that people died, if not directly from germs and disease, was weaponry. As they begin to bog down in the muck, in the mud of the war, specifically in northern France and Belgium, they dig trenches. This starts as a temporary maneuver to get out of the line of fire of the people on the other side. As you would imagine, though, once you dig a trench, it's very easy to avoid being shot at, but the other side also has trenches, and it's hard to get them out. They lay barbed wire in front of their trenches to prevent attack and to prevent the opposing side coming after them. They use mortars and cannon as well as artillery. Troops live in hole and get rotting feet and legs from the muck and the mud and the water in these trenches. Movement to and from the trenches is fraught, as you would imagine. If you put your head up, you generally get it shot off. This also leads to lots of germs and disease, contributing to the tremendous loss of life. Here's a chart of the lines of trenches. At the front is no man's land, where you will get shot if you try and charge the opposing trench over here. Perhaps a small trench leads to a listening post. Then there are stakes and barbed wire. The front line is right here. Another trench links it to a backup line as well. And then at the very back are the people in charge, the commanders, the captains, and the generals. Here's a picture of people living inside the trench. Again, great for defense until the person told you to go over the top and attack the opposing trench, which tended not to end very well, as we will see. Weaponry and tactics, rifles. These are used at first on planes as well, but it eventually transitions to more effective and more brutal and deadly machine guns on the nose of planes, as also being fired from the trenches, as well as mortars being launched here, sort of a small shell that is launched in a parabolic arc, lands in the opposing lines and explodes upon impact. Here is the German word for it, Minenwerfer. We also have chemical warfare used for the first time. This is the product of the Industrial Revolution. New chemicals are being used in factories and are now being converted to military use. Tear gases, chlorine gas, as well as other highly toxic poisonous gases. People have to wear a gas mask to protect them, and even then, it is not always 100% foolproof. Burns, scarred lungs, wheezing, as well as blindness can result from these different chemicals and gases. We also have the first use of tanks, taking the new technology of trucks and cars and applying them to armed warfare. These tend to come about later in the war. They tend to break down rather easily, but they are useful for not getting shot at and for plowing over barbed wire. We also have, for the first time in war, the existence of planes. These start out as sort of mainly used as spy vehicles to scout out the position of the enemy. Maybe they have guns on them, but it's often one person manning it and hard to be accurate. By the end of the war, there are planes, combating planes flying through the air, dropping bombs, as well as using machine guns. So over the relatively brief span of a few years, much more complexity as well as technological advancement for the purposes of mass murder. We also have subs. Here is a picture of a sub itself. These are still crew devices. They tend to sink more often than people on them would like, but they are being used and used to battle ships. Here in the upper right is a picture of the English ship, the Lusitania, sunk by German subs in 1915. One of the causes ultimately leading to the involvement in the War of America. The two principal opposing sides here are Great Britain and Germany. Also, of course, on the German side, Austria-Hungary, as well as the Ottoman Empire and Italy. On Great Britain's side, France, as well as Russia. Neither side is able to win. It is sort of a lengthy stalemate. People are dying by the thousands and hundreds of thousands with very little won or lost. Germany strongly believes that the United States would never enter the war. Alas, for their sake, they were wrong. We do enter the war in spring of 1917. By 1 year later, have mobilized, have sent troops as well as goods and services to Europe on the side of Great Britain, France, and we help to break through, end the stalemate, and ultimately end the war on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. This was known at the time as Armistice Day and is now known as Veterans Day. This is the first of what will unfortunately become a pattern of total warfare. What we mean is that everything from every country is devoted, dedicated, and used in the war effort. Home front have to ration food and supplies to make sure that the country can support and back the war effort. They limit rents, and it's sort of strong regulation of the food and the economy and much of the country in support of the war effort. Women are often now being put to work in factories because all of the men, or most of the men of working age, have gone to war. Government takes over transportation and other services for the benefit of the public. We see heavy fines and arrest and jailing if you happen to speak out, write, or protest against the war, as we will see. We see in the aftermath of the war, over 50 million people died, or did, as it says, not sure about that, in 1918 from a bird flu. And this war ultimately helps to change the role of women forever, being involved in the war effort, as well as being occupied more and more in jobs outside the home. It is also the first widespread use of propaganda, mass produced in posters, in speeches, as well as in movie theaters, to convince the public of the need and the desire to support the war effort. Thank you very much, and goodbye.